Esteemed colleagues, we continue our working day in the UCMC. The topic of the next event is the package of key reforms in Ukraine, opinion of Strategic Advisory Group. Our guests are Leszek, Balcerowicz, co-founder of Strategic Advisory Group for support of Ukrainian reforms, and Ivan Mikloš, also the co-chairman of the Strategic Advisory Group of support of Ukrainian reforms. The first one is Leszek Balcerowicz. Good afternoon. We are working with around 10 minutes each, not more, to leave maximum time for your questions. I would like to remind you that the strategic group of strategy advisors was set up in April this year. The first stage, we were trying to help the government to develop the programs, especially the first part, horizontal, all the current tasks, and we concentrated on the package of reforms, and that's our product. It will be on the website, right, in English, but it will be in Ukrainian in 3 days. We are working for everyone, for all democratic authorities in Ukraine, the president, the government, the parliament. We are trying to help them in integration and in development and implementation of the program, but of course we work for the sake of Ukraine, for the society, and it's important that we can meet you so that we can communicate via you with the Ukrainian society. These are our proposals. That does not mean that the authorities agree with all the details, but we believe that just the logic of the proposal, the logic is such that we need to move as a package, not just one by one. It's better to go to do it as a package, but not slowly from the point of view of economy and politics. It's better to have the package accepted than separate measures, and we need to move fast. Why fast? Because the elections in Ukraine will take place in 2.5 years. If this package is approved, then there will be the effect. It will be great. It will produce many effects before the elections. The stake is big. This year, we are starting the economic growth of Ukraine. It's slow, but it's there. And what is happening with the reforms, on that depends whether this growth will be slow or fast. Without economic growth, it is impossible to address any social or economic problem. Ivan will present some of these things. I would like to say that in our package we are talking about some key reforms of the state apparatus, and also we are talking about public finance. It is important to strengthen stability, but not to have it flooded. We're talking about tax system, and we are also proposing the reforms on main problems. Privatization, you know that for the last 12 years there was no privatization at all. There were some processes, decaying processes of the state property, deregulation, demonopolization. A lot has to be done. Energy reform, you know that Naftogaz is a big achievement, and land reform. To introduce such land relations like in other former socialist countries. You have a huge potential which is slowed down by what's happening now. This memorandum, this moratorium on land sale. Memorandum is IMF. Okay, you can read it because that's publicly accessible. What IMF is offering and with what the authorities of Ukraine agree. That's all public. That's good. How many minutes? 2 more. I give you 2 minutes for questions and comments. Now Ivan.
Balcerowicz, до слова запрошується пан Іван Міклош.
Now Ivan Mikloš. Good afternoon. Allow me to start from saying that a lot has been done for macroeconomic stabilization, but to get results for people, for the growth of economy, we need not just to continue, we need to speed up reforms, not just in macroeconomic stabilization, but structural reforms, institutional reforms are to be implemented. Here it shows what are the main objectives that we need to achieve with the assistance of reforms, that reforms are made not for reforms, but for people. I will be talking about some, not all of them. The document that you can read has more spheres, and that was shown on the previous slide. I will be talking about the most important ones. First, I would like to say that it is important to improve the structure and procedures of the state apparatus. One of the biggest problems is that we don't have such a cooperation or interaction between the parliament government to have a faster progress in reforms. In 2015, only 1/3, only 37% of state draft laws were supported by the parliament. This is to be changed until we have the support, more efficient support of draft laws. It is impossible to speed up the reforms because most of the reforms are to be implemented via new laws. Also, we need to introduce the expert analysis of the consequences of the decisions of the government and consequences of new draft laws, which the parliament is passing. Also, the government is to take the position on draft laws because it is impossible to continue what's happening now. No one knows who's behind the draft law. The draft laws are discussed at the last moment, and we don't know what could be the consequences of these draft laws. The second thing I would like to talk about is anti-corruption. There were many draft laws prepared. I'm talking about passing the draft laws, but the big problem is with the implementation of the laws, and we need to have a new anti-corruption strategy because the one that's working since 2015 is very weak and it's not supported by practical action plans. As to anti-corruption, I would like to say that the most effective way of combating corruption is speeding up reforms such as liberalization, deregulation, and privatization. We need to mention the transparent privatization, which is open, transparent, and competitive. As to public funds, one of the most positive achievements of the last 2 years is macroeconomic stabilization, including fiscal consolidation. Achievements are very positive and important. We need to mention that the situation is very fragile, and we need to continue that, because unless we continue strengthening macroeconomic stabilization and fiscal consolidation, this may go back to very bad results. It is important also, and we are suggesting that, to implement structural reforms. Without structural reforms in such sectors as education, public health, social maintenance, without changes in these spheres, it is impossible to have the macroeconomic stability and fiscal consolidation. Without macroeconomic stabilization, we cannot expect to have any economic growth. This is very important that fiscal consolidation is connected to structural reforms. As to taxes, we believe that it is very important to improve administering taxes, to cut off corruption, to reduce corruption, and to reform the simplified system of taxation. Simplified system is the source of pathology. We need to have a simplified system only for small businesses. The first step we offer is to cancel simplified system for legal entities. The second thing, which is most important from the point of view of attracting investments and fighting corruption and restructuring Ukrainian economy, is privatization. Privatization for 11 years we have no progress with privatization. Ukraine has a huge apparatus. The State Property Fund has more than 2,000 people, but nothing has been done. We need to have stronger leadership and to conduct privatization faster. We also we give specific proposals how this should be done, how the state companies should be divided into groups and what to do with these groups. If you have questions, I will answer more specifically. Another sphere where we suggest to speed up reforms is the sphere of corporate governance, where something was done in 2015, but then the progress does not continue. And it will be necessary to improve the situation and to implement new management, new independent supervisory boards. We need to separate political from economic responsibilities. Deregulation is another sector that we believe to be one of the most important, and here we have specific proposals, like to reduce the number of control bodies, introduce efficient and transparent system of control, and organizing audit of all the regulatory measures and canceling all that are not necessary. Energy sector. A lot has been done here, but we need to do more than was done. This market is a monopoly and non-transparent market, and we need to introduce the third European package and continue liberalization and deregulation of this sector. It's good that the independent regulator was set up. This needs to be continued. We need new law on electricity market. And I also would like to say a few words about land reform and land market. Leszek mentioned something. I believe that the land reform, when it's implemented, when moratorium is cancelled, land reform could be one of the most important factors of the development, not just attracting investments, but the factors of developing small and medium-sized business, and it is important for development of the village. We agree that we need to have certain reforms to open up the market. We believe this is possible. It is possible to do it within several years. We can reduce the risk that people are afraid that this market will not be transparent, that oligarchs will buy everything. Certain conditions could be introduced to make this process open, transparent, so that it helps the development of Ukraine. We believe this is one of the biggest priorities, and I believe that continuation of the moratorium on land sale is very bad idea. We need to find consensus, political consensus, how to do it faster.
Thank you, Mikloš. And now Mr. Balcerowicz and Mr. Mikloš are ready for questions. So please introduce yourself and ask in Russian. Please. Alexander Rastinov, Ukrainian Medicine Journal. The question, could you specify about medical reform? A colleague was dealing with the issues of medical sphere, and he worked on good proposals, and this will be introduced stage by stage. And the first stage is the basic family doctors, and also there can be separate conference on this in order to have specialists here. We are ready for this. I can tell you that there is a good group of reformers at the Ministry of Health and a new minister. And this reform, it is going step by step, and in 2017 there will be family doctors introduced, then specialist level, and the next year specialized hospitals will be reformed. And the main principle it is based on is that money follow the patient, and money follow the patient. So there should be transparency, efficiency, and best doctors should practice, and they should get more patients and more money. Because today, this is like this, that money goes to the institutions that exist and work, and there is no transparency and waste of money. So money do not follow the patient and goes to illegal economy, and it should go to legal economy. Please, Union Safonova, tell us, please. This week, International Monetary Fund made public its recommendations for Ukraine, and in what way does your plan coincide with the proposals of the IMF? And second question, what are the drawbacks, what are the weaknesses that will raise discussions, and what issues will be difficult to follow with? So we cooperate with International Monetary Fund and with the European community and with advisors, and we also work independently. We make our own conclusions. We do not repeat their conclusions. We made it independently. But I would say that mostly in all areas and aspects we agree with the IMF, especially as to fiscal area, and especially on monetary policy and financing, banking, and we share the ideas that Central Bank of Ukraine does a good work and in these areas. And you can find this information. This is called prior action, and this is obligations of authorities of Ukraine, and reputation and money depend on this. So you can read it, and the stabilization of financing and structural reforms and fighting corruption and other issues. And second question about the weaknesses. So it would be better if everything would be great and move fast. But what we see is that support by the parliament, there can be a problem because coalition is not efficient, not only coalition and cooperation of coalition and government. There can be a problem, and we should focus the activity that it can be done without the parliament. There are many things and areas where it can be decided without parliament, but we should make our cooperation with the parliament more efficient. And I said about it when I told about these things. So this is the area where we see not only the need, but the opportunity to improve the work of the parliament, of the government, and their cooperation. I can add. So the weaknesses is that there is a potential, but it goes slow because bad institutional decisions. And I see there's lacking of privatization, and we should reduce corruption and to increase growth. And without decisive actions of the power, this huge potential will be delayed, and there should be demonopolization, and there are private monopolies that belong to oligarchs. Demonopolization means de-oligarchization as well, and we are trying to get such a picture when there is some unnecessary influence of oligarchs on the economy, and there is great potential of acceleration in e-government sphere. And you have good specialists in the area in your society, and you can have a leap. And by this new technology, you can improve administration. And there are definite proposals on this. And land reform, you have a big potential that is delayed because of lack of market. That should be done in a package, not only lift moratorium, but also to create a package. And there is a great group of specialists. They cooperate with the World Bank. These are Ukrainian specialists. Thank you. Next question. Vladimir Zagorodsky, Defense Express Group. So, as to our specialization, what problems do you see in defense area, in defense sphere? Maybe this is not a special area, but what about the defense sphere? Maybe you can. Maybe it should be restructured in some way, like in Poland, and maybe we should fight monopolies and oligarchs in this area. So maybe Ivan will answer this question, I believe. And experts said before this, the experts in this area, our group, we have 8 experts, and we are focusing our activity on economic area, and we didn't work in this area, but we believe that Ukraine during last 2 years after Euromaidan did really a lot. You didn't have army, you didn't have military capabilities, and now Ukraine has the army that is really powerful. And as to economy, this is really important. Ukraine, in defense sphere, it should be able to defend its territory. And when economy works, when it will grow, there will be more and more resources, and there will be more opportunities to improve military capabilities and everything that is connected with this area. There will be better mechanisms, better tools in the military sphere. As to military defense production, so I can tell what happened in Slovakia. When we started reforms, it was the economy. The huge part of it was directed at military production of tanks, and they were not competitive. And we carried out reforms. We attracted investment, and this economy was restructured. And we do not produce military weaponry. We create cars, passenger cars. And I believe that for Ukraine, this is one of the ways. I didn't tell that you shouldn't have this military equipment, but you should have some modernization. And these enterprises, they should attract investors. I think that there are two issues. How much money do we need for military expenses? It depends on economy. Weak economy means weak defense. So those reforms we propose, they're really important for civil society and to strengthen defense sphere. Second question, how this money is spent, what amount goes for pensions to increase some expenses, and what money is provided for defense. And in the United States, practically all enterprises that produce military equipment, they are private. And this is not like in Soviet Union and Poland. There was also privatization, and new enterprises emerged, private enterprises. And of course, there are state enterprises, but there are private institutions, and they attracted a lot of international investors. For example, from the United States. And I believe that this is a good way to privatize and to attract foreign investors. Thank you. And one more example. So it is connected with this. So how they are connected? So in 2013, Ukraine spent 10% of its GDP on subsidies of energy tariffs, 10% of GDP, and at the same time they spent 1% for defense. So this is the answer. It correlates, and when the money goes to regulation, that is source of corruption and oligarchy. If you get rid of it, you will get financing for defense sphere. Next question, please. Good afternoon, Andrei Miguel, consultant on management. So we should measure our results. What will be the rate in 2 years if we are speaking about GDP per capita? And if we are speaking about e-governance, what number of employees will be? And what will be the percentage of allocation of public funds of the state budget, because a lot of funds are redistributed through the budget. Do you have such data in your report? So 3 questions at least. The first, so growth should be considered not only for 1 or 2 years, but it should be long-term planning, and we have simple example. There can be stagnation and slow growth if, for example, there will be stabilization in the financial sphere, or steps ahead, small steps ahead, or it can be such a result there should be 5-6%, and this is your choice. The politicians who promote who are under your influence. So we and other consultants, we make our proposals because we know world experience, and we propose best options. And then you should implement. Political leadership of Ukraine is responsible for implementation, and also opposition is responsible. Opposition, they do not have license to do bad things for the state. They should take into account the interest of the state, and we believe that, and we hope that our proposals to the power of Ukraine and to society, that it will find acceptance. I agree. The more reforms we have, the more the growth will be. And Ukraine has potential for growth, not even for 1 or 2 years, but maybe 5-6%, because Ukraine is below its potential now. This potential will be used only when the reforms are implemented. And as to the number of about the money that is distributed, the first step was made, and it is important. Starting 2014-2015, the number of expenditures reduced from 55 to 44%, and this is a major step. And what is important is to continue this process, and the optimum public expenditures GDP is 35% of GDP, and in Slovakia it was done during several years. We were going down from 55% to 35%. So the public expenses were reduced, and we had a huge growth, one of the best, and the government had more and more money, and all GDP it was less, and the business had more money for development, and that supported the growth. And this should be repeated here.
I need to mention that those who harm stabilization of finance harm the economic growth and harm the society, because economy depends on stabilization and on improvement of conditions for companies, for businesses. The next question. I would like to understand, Alexeyenko Valery, in the result of the reforms, how will the subjects of economic activity will feel the reforms? We understand that the land market will give some preferences for agricultural, centralization will give for us. But you said nothing about tax changes. Everyone knows that a big problem is administering VAT in Ukraine. That is what did most for economic collapse. And customs. These two interrelated things which do not allow the real sector of economy to go up. And then financing. But the main question is customs. The businesses in Ukraine should be able to compete with external businesses. How will your reform, if it is supported by the parliament, by the government, how will what we will feel, how we will feel the change of economic conditions? It's not like public administering. Talking about taxes, I mentioned that there are measures directed to improve administering of taxes. Some steps were made as to VAT. There's now an e-declaration, and there is a transparent system there. As to customs, something was done, but it's not enough. We talked with the Prime Minister that in order to have more with European countries, to have common customs, one customs with Slovakia, with Poland, Hungary, so that it's one customs for Ukraine and those countries. That what could save money and reduce corruption. As to simplified system, I said that we believe this should be changed because the existing system is very bad. It's not fair. It has certain conditions which are incomparable with those when businessmen do not use it. It's against the system of fair play. We understand that that's very sensitive. Maybe this will be made in steps, and the first step we proposed it should be cancelled for legal entities. We don't see the reason why legal entities can enjoy this system. This should be just for small entrepreneurs. And you mentioned how these reforms, how will they improve conditions for entrepreneurs? When the economy is growing, when there is a growth, there will be more demand. There will be more investment opportunities, more money in the economy, more loans, better conditions for loans. That's not theory, that's practice of the countries who have implemented such reforms. This has not just direct consequences and results when you implement the reform of administering taxes, but it has a positive non-indirect results for everyone who work and live in the country. I believe that there are two indicators that you can have to follow. Private capital investments, do they grow or not? The dynamic of private investments they reflect conditions. Then small and medium-sized companies, what slows down their development? The risk. If the risk is created by the parliament, because one day there might be new law that slows down the movement. Stabilization, better cooperation, planning of the work between the parliament and the authorities is very important to increase capital investments, including foreign investments. And second, law enforcement. There are laws, but how are they enforced? It's about prosecution and judiciary. It is important from economic growth. There should be no corruption, no arbitrary decisions. First, important steps were made. We need to monitor how it's followed up. Laws are great, but how are they enforced is important. Thank you, Mr. Mikloš. Thank you, Mr. Balcerowicz. We need to finish. If you have more questions, you can ask them off records. The next event will take place in 2-3 minutes.